Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Voices from the Margins. This podcast series is brought to you by South Asia Research Institute for Minorities, SARIM, where we explore the nuances of identity, power, and belonging across South Asia. My name is Furqan Ahmed, and in today's episode of Contours of Identity, Rethinking Minority Politics in South Asia, we will be deep diving into how minority identities are shaped, contested, and reimagined in one of the most diverse yet deeply divided regions of the world. Our guest today is someone who embodies both academic brilliance and an unwavering commitment to critical public discourse at a very young age. Hello, Ellen David Simon. Thank you so much for joining us for the first time ever. Alan David, I know him from a couple of our scholarships at International Association of Political Sciences Students. We happened to interact with each other. I found him very, very hardworking in terms of his commitment to the domain of political science, which really inspired me. And this and we've decided to have him on board. Alan, I'll give a brief introduction about Alan David, and then I'll request him to provide talk us through about his journey and how he got to that position. So he's currently pursuing a postgraduate study in political science at St. Xavier's College in Kolkata. He graduated first class first as valedictorian, and we would also be hearing about how he managed to achieve such a monumental feat. And he now contributes actively to platforms like A Different View. Again, it's a repository of International Association of Political Science Students. And he also does editorial thing with Armchair Journal as well. Alan is also a seasoned public speaker, and his peers, I'm sure he must be proud of himself, fondly term him as a social butterfly, which always, brings about bridge about communities and conversations. Alan, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to this
Pleasure.
podcast. Uh, so, without wasting your time, I would be jumping into your journey. So, let's begin with your own story. You moved across editorial spaces, academic institutions, and global research networks. How have these diverse experiences shaped your understanding of South Asia's political identity landscape? Over to you.
Thanks a lot for the question. I would say that South Asia is not certainly a term that you get acquainted with very early in your life. It's not at all a term that is academically been there relatively for very long. And I would say the first time I was introduced to it academically would be in my semester six, where you have a dedicated paper for South Asian regionalism. And he was the one who introduced us to how the University of Chicago and area studies, and certainly the US Department of State, had its hand in creating this entire terminology, which was far less unipolar, far less asymmetric than what we were far more used to as the Indian subcontinent, which quite a lot, quite to a degree, blurs the great degree of identities that India itself hosts and also its own neighbors hosts. And these neighbors are not, always completely divided on lines of political boundaries. We have far more affinities than differences, and these the South Asian communities themselves are not very bound within borders. You would find linguistic affinities, cultural, great degree of ethnic, diversity within the boundaries as well. And so the entire meta region that we call South Asia, as a whole, as a region, became introduced to me very late on than I would have wanted it to be, or anyone could expect it to be. But I think that is where we understand that this is a very sensitive region, where introducing such great deal of analysis and such great degree of cross-cutting diversities is very difficult unless you reach a certain degree of academic maturity, which is probably why it is a late introduction. But to a great degree, these experiences where have been with IAPS for more than a year and a half now, with editorial tasks that I have taken on very recently since last December, I have been able to meet people, especially from South Asia, who perhaps have far more cultural affinity to me than I would have expected, and they are able to a great degree, able to relate with me. And these identities that we speak of as minorities, South Asia by itself has not only a great degree of minorities, but minorities within minorities. And that is where South Asian identities become far more complex than what we see throughout the world. And as a student, and with the task of how I have been able to graduate through St. Xavier's College, and how now I pursue my master's degree, these introductions of how you can analyze something without being, torn between your own identity and the identity of who you are researching is very important when you look into South Asia, where emotions run high and you can be very emotive about subjects that are closer to home. But it is important that we are able to be humane and yet at the same time analyze things from a independent lens. And that is what is very important when looking at minorities and identities in South Asia.
Thank you so much, Alan, for providing the insights regarding your journey on how you got exposed to the subject of political identity landscape. You said it that it was you were late exposed to this. I mean, I would say second to that thought. I mean, this theme is still new to me. I am still learning. So you're quite lucky that you've got exposed to this theme at a very young age. So thank you so much for walking us through. So you talk about how minorities are being researched in terms of definition of minorities. In South Asia, the term minority isn't just about numbers.
Mhm.
It's layered with questions of religion, caste, language, and ethnicity. As you said, minorities are within minorities, right? In your view, how we reframe our understanding of what it means to be a minority in today's South Asia, or let's say in today's global South.
Right. A very pertinent question, I would say, because the study of minorities isn't very easy. At times, what appears to be a numeric majority might as well turn out to be a minority in different senses. And you would find that certain groups within a majority might feel like a minority. A very good example would be perhaps women in certain majority groups, perhaps, where they are, where there are cultural subordinations, there are hierarchies of patriarchy that still subordinate women in most communities in South Asia. And so it's better, I would suppose, that you use a very intersectional, experience driven research model for these minorities in South Asia, where, as people, identities flow very naturally to us, but identities also have their own way of multiplying onto us. A very good work by Bell Hooks, an early second wave feminist who went ahead and coined many of the intersectional terminologies that we use, is the compounding of marginalities. So a woman in a minority might be facing multiple more subordinations than perhaps a man in that same minority. And so, as you said, caste, ethnicity, linguistic differences, religious differences, these might be compounding on certain communities more than we believe on others. And these disadvantages over time become very burdensome and also very limiting to these communities, which are one, perhaps numerically small; second, do not have access to power sharing, perhaps are not as democratized as possible, and certainly with not enough amount of resources to be able to compete in the group in terms of group competition. And so these communities, and it's important that we see identities as multitudinal in every sense. For example, if I just take my own example, from my name itself, Alan David Simon, I am a Christian by religion, I am a Bengali by ethnicity, I am, say, an Indian by nationality and by citizenship, and I'm a male, I am of the middle class. So at the same time, a man or a woman would be, the identity would be multiple. It is not that we only embody one identity. And so these identities also have their own proximities at times. So at times when you are facing religious discrimination, your religious identity becomes most important, it becomes most pertinent. But when you're facing caste discrimination, your caste identity somehow comes out. And the way we have seen how these identities interplay, for example, in India, caste identities have become secularized, where while Islam itself does not have any caste hierarchies, Indian Islam to a great degree has been able to borrow caste identities into Islam itself. And so these identities are, first of all, very multitudinal. They interact within the same person at the same time. Certainly, they have different proximities depending on what kind of groups you are interacting with. A very good example also comes to mind, how that South Asian identity has also come up while, when we are at our homelands in South Asia, we are divided between our nationalities of being an Indian or a Pakistani or a Nepali. While we are abroad, we suddenly come into this entire embodiment of a South Asian nationality, a Desi nationality, so to say. And so this embodiment of nationality also shows us how, the intersections of multiple identities and who you're interacting with at what point of time becomes very important. And so identities and minorities by their very nature have become far more experiential rather than a universal truth. So to look at minorities as a universal category, or discrimination against minorities or hardship by minorities as universal in any way in South Asia or beyond, especially in the global South, would be a mistake. I would say a great degree of progress can be made if it is looked as an experiential reality, with far more focus on ethnographic studies, which can bring out far more diverse conclusions that we might have well missed in meta studies.
Thank you so much, Alan, for uh, comprehensively talk about how you define identity, and you gave some examples of as a universal reality. So the term minorities or the minority needs to be looked at as a universally uh, uh, accepted reality, right? Because we still don't know the definition of minority, right? So we are still like, I mean, being having someone hugely in numbers, you're trying to find yourself really confined in a situation that, okay, we need to, define ourselves in numbers, right? So thank you so much for that. Um, since you've been representing and working with youth at IEFs and your other commitments, you have been deeply involved with youth-led academic platforms, and your work with IEFs reflects transitional engagement with students' voices. What role do you think young scholars and students' movements can play in disrupting dominant narratives and amplifying the lived realities of marginalized communities?
I would say that youth organizations play a role that perhaps established organizations don't always feel comfortable playing. Established organizations, for example, established media houses always have had a good network with the government, with a great degree of state actors, which almost makes them, to a degree, complacent in questioning certain things that perhaps youth organizations are far more liberal in addressing. And I would say, for example, iapps, we have WhatsApp groups, and to take a very simple example would be how in those WhatsApp communities you would see a great degree of discussion on very minute topics, perhaps, and we have groups that are multi-ethnic and multinational, people from all around the world, students from all around the world, discussing something that has perhaps happened, that is so alien perhaps to their own environments or homes, but nevertheless giving an trying to see how they can also figure out a solution to it, or at least try to figure out an analysis to why it is happening. And so the engagement of youth is not only far more, it's far less subtle, it's far more driven. And also, to a great degree, we live in a situation in a world which is completely networked, and the youth, it finds itself in a position where less than being a citizen, it's far more a netizen, where it's been able to provide itself into a community within the internet, where it is driven and where it is informed, most importantly, about events throughout the world. And youth organizations have always played a very important role in South Asia as well. If you just look at the movements that have been driven, it's been mostly by civil society organizations, NGOs, be it in terms of environmentalism, be it in terms of education, be it in terms of human rights, be it in terms of rights for inmates. And so these organizations that have been over time coming through have had a far more dissenting voice against the order of things as well as that of the state, rather than being far more submissive as established organizations like that of the established media has been. And so much of the dissent that you see nowadays in South Asia, especially, has been through platforms like YouTube, like podcasts, channels, like a great number of independent media channels where individuals themselves have taken on roles of free journalism, against advertisements by big multinational companies, or that by the government, to keep themselves free, where they are funded by their own community of netizens. And that, to a great degree, brings around the solidarity of the youth, and with problems no longer being very local problems, something like climate change, something that has been able to create a solidarity beyond national borders. With these problems, these are all problems of a nature that cannot be handled by national governments themselves. These have become far more threatening to human future as a whole, and therefore youth organizations have been able to find these as centers of solidarity, where they have been able to mobilize themselves around these. And we see that in terms of, say, for example, the Me Too movement, which started in USA, but nevertheless it expanded with such a degree of fervor that we saw its ripples even in South Asia, especially in industries like that of Bollywood, and the entire effect that it had in creating creating a consensus over how women should be treated, and how third wave feminism has redefined the whole world as an entity. And therefore youth organizations not only play a very important role as link makers, but and also as informed citizens as well as netizens, but they also create a solidarity beyond borders that we need in a world that is beset by crisis of global scales. We no longer have problems that are locally that can locally be solved or be locally be defined. Now we have problems that are global, and so global citizens are what we need, and the youth has been making that really possible.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, I mean, youth play a huge role in terms of, shaping the narratives. But I mean, we've recently seen some of the, hugely organized crackdowns that have been taking place against the youth movements. I mean, in the wake of uh, uh, Gaza, in the wake of MAGA moments as well. So stuff. So these are the things that where needs to be looked around very minutely in how the youth movements or the crackdown against youth movements can be decolonized in terms of stopping the freedom
Very
of
true.
expression. So moving to our next question, which is nationalism versus minority rights. Across the region, we are seeing a rise in majoritarianism, authoritarianism, and autocratic regimes, and nationalism, often at the cost of minority rights and pluralistic values. What do you see as the most pressing tensions between state building narratives and the everyday realities of minority in South Asia, and might begin how might we be beginning to resolve or at least comfort these tensions?
One of the very interesting nature of South Asia has been that the political realities of South Asia has been very, in a confining manner, has been defined mostly by post 1947 borders. And if you just look at how political history in South Asia has turned out to be, it's mostly been borders that have been arbitrarily drawn by a colonial government, then given on to a post colonial government, which at that point of time had weak state infrastructures to enforce those borders or even do justice to state building. So much of state building has happened through a rigorous nature of nationalism, which was, first of all, very homogenizing and certainly exclusivist in its nature. And what do I mean by that is that, to a great degree, if you ask an Indian what makes an Indian Indian, the answer would be surprisingly that we are not Pakistani. Perhaps a Pakistani, when asked the same thing, would say that we are not Indians. And a Bangladeshi would answer that we are neither Indians nor Pakistani. And the entire answer, the pattern of answering comes to the hit that, you center around that point of homogeneity that has been used in the process of nation building, which is necessarily not a part of nation building, but these, South Asian states have always relied on this exclusivist style of nation building so as to create an order where there didn't exist to be one. Where you look at the borders that were placed, you had communities that were split apart by these borders. If I could just take a few examples, for example, if you look at how the Sindhis had to migrate mostly towards Gujarat and Maharashtra, these Sindhis probably had far more affinities towards the people who were living in Sindh rather than those who were living in Gujarat and Maharashtra. And similarly, if you look at how the Bengalis in Bangladesh had to migrate to different states, including Assam and Meghalaya or Tripura, the entire problem being that these forced migration patterns that were created in 1947 created, one, a problem of migration, second, a problem where some people found themselves to be in countries that was not meant for them, where leaders had taken arbitrary decisions and it was all of a sudden that they lost their homes. And these forced migration patterns also created split communities all across the borders, and minorities that had already coexisted for a long period of time. South Asia has been a region of tolerance. It has been a region of great degree of diversity since the medieval era, if not even prior to that. And so even after that, we see the historic process of nation building has been very exclusivist, where communities have been bound together in terms of a national identity, which is homogenizing. It's one country, it's one nationality, it's one nation. And the entire problem with this homogenizing process has been that certain minorities have found themselves missing in that national identity. If you just look at how you would define, say, an Indian or a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi, the entire question of being, say, for example, even if we consider India to be secular, the great notion of having a Hindu majority in India, or an Islamic Pakistan, or an Islamic Bengali Bangladesh, these have been very, very interesting notions where the homogenizing character of nationalism has been put forth. And if you look at, say, in the 21st century as well, the commentators have always projected that there has been a driven religious angle to nationalism in all South Asian, across all South Asian states, even in Nepal, Bhutan, where minorities have faced great degree of exclusion as well as displacement. And so nationalism to a great degree has played a role in creating communities, creating national identities that are not inclusive. These are not national, and you would see that pattern being created even in economics as well as political power, where minorities have been unable to claim their fair representation or even a good degree of economic resources as groups. And so it's something that has multiplied over time. The exact nature of national identities in South Asia has certainly created more minorities than it has created a uniform or a united community, to be exact. And if you just look at how states have responded when national identities have been challenged, for example, insurgencies. South Asia is infamous for the number of insurgencies that we see throughout the states, and how they have been dealt with. The very notion of dealing with insurgencies has been a military solution to political problems, where we have seen, for example, in India, we have seen the use and misuse of the ASPA powers in the northeastern states, where insurgencies had happened and where the political problems were attempted to be addressed with military solutions, which certainly does not help when you have ethnic groups who are certainly not finding their own place in that national identity and the process of nation building. And so that creates a greater degree of distance between what are centralized powers within the capitals of, say, Islamabad or New Delhi or Dhaka, and what are these minorities who are existing in the peripheries of the nation. So the great number of times where insurgencies or political dissidents have been treated as anti-nationals, against the nation, beyond the national identity, has always made sure that the state responds with stronger, more coercive instruments, rather than mediation, rather than accommodation, rather than far more political solutions that could have been addressed. And we see wherever peace building has been created, those have been processes of political accommodation throughout South Asia, where insurgencies have been, either been addressed or brought into political forum. One good example would be the Naxalite revolutions in Nepal, where almost for 2 decades there was a civil war raging on. But once a political solution of accommodating the communists within the parliamentary democracy system was recognized, we see that the communists were able to be part of mainstream politics. And similarly, in India, we have had Naxalite movements in India, and mostly in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, even in West Bengal, to my own state. And so accommodation has been a way. Economic development is one of the greatest instruments of bringing people together into this fold of national identity. And I think that is where minorities stick out the worst, because even if you might not want to have a prime minister from your own community, but you would want your daily bread to be defended. And where bread and butter issues are neglected for these smaller communities, that is where these minorities actually suffer, where they are distanced from the economic development that the region has mostly seen in the 21st century. And so, it's a multi-layered response that is needed. It's not nationalism by itself that is hostile to minorities. Certainly not minority nationalism itself can be a great source of power, can be a great source of mobilization. We have seen Dalit mobilization around subaltern identities that have played a great role in the Hindi belt in India itself. So national identities can be instrumentalized as means of minority mobilization as well. It's not inherently opposed to it, but how nation building and nationalism has been made into a far more religious, far more exclusivist, far more homogenizing identity in South Asia, that has certainly been detrimental to the rights of minorities as a whole. Within minorities within themselves, for example, women to a great degree have been, they have been casualties of what religious codes have done in multiple communities across South Asia, where they have had to live with religious codes which are often biased against them, and without any civil procedure to help them out of it. Inheritance, in form of inheritance, also adoption. These have been very difficult topics for women across several communities, where religious codes have played a detrimental role to their rights. And so national identities can be instrumentalized, but it has been a clash so as to say it's been a clash that can be compensated with greater political accommodation of minorities across the board.
Thank you so much. I mean, your last line would suffice that question. Like different like multi-layered issues need multi-layered solution in terms of accommodation. So that means we're still a long way away for achieving those goals in terms of accommodating politically specific with a specific uh, to minority communities. So yeah, thank you so much, Alan, for bringing this question at a very like comprehensive manner. So lastly, we would be talking about the future aspects. Let's end more with hopeful note. If you had to imagine a more inclusive, just and plural South Asia, what would that look like to you? And what practical steps do you think researchers, institutions, and civil society to help must take to help themselves for better vision in real time?
To a great degree, inclusivity starts at the smallest steps. I'm reminded of Amartya Sen's theory of justice, where he says that even the smallest senses of justice can actually create a just society. You don't need to be doing a great deal, many things to create so. And one of the basic things I would say, a great degree of practical measures can be taken. Let me borrow from the sustainable development goals perhaps. Education would be one of the major pillars of creating an inclusive society in South Asia. Much of South Asia, while literate, has not been sufficiently exposure that an educated society would require and to create a civil society of its own. Partho Sen makes a very interesting commentary on Indian society, and I think that that can be more or less applied to the greater South Asian society, where he says that the civil society has always been confined to the privileged. It has never been that education, legal institutions, legal procedures and processes has ever percolated down. And deepening of democracy, therefore, has been a hindrance in South Asia because we are not a homogeneous society, neither are we a society of privileged people. We are a society that is diverse, and it's that diversity that makes it difficult for institutions to capacity that can be those pillars where the political society, as as he puts it, Partha Chatterjee puts it, needs to be brought within the folds of the civil society, where institutions, state institutions, most importantly, as well as civic society or organizations, including education, media, is made far more accessible. We talk about the voice of the voiceless, how media can play a very important role. And I think social media has created a society where every individual can, at the end of the day, in their own right news, and which has created many other simultaneous problems of group conflicts, and certainly a lot of hate speech as well, especially in our context. The entire possibility of providing opportunity to every individual, every last man in this subcontinent, to be an opinion leader is quite an elating and quite a empowering journey. And certainly education plays a very important role. So does media, and to a great degree, again, I would quote one of our own scholars here, Ashish Nandi. He quite pointedly points out how institutions in South Asia have been largely borrowed, and such institutions which have been largely borrowed have deviated from their traditional roots. Certainly, we do not follow the Western form of secularism anywhere in South Asia for that matter. And certainly, that form of secularism cannot be applied to a host of people who are far more religious and far more concentrated on religious identity than in the West. And so that partition of the church and the state does not apply in South Asia. And certainly Western institutions cannot be taken at their verbatim in South Asia. And Ashish Nandi very basically asked us to focus on far more indigenous solutions of toleration. You'd see, pre-partition villages having great number of people who lived side by side, despite having different cultural tastes, different dietary regulations, religious identities. And I'm reminded of the small documentary that I once saw about a graveyard in Punjab. But it's for Muslim people, yet it is safeguarded by the local gurudwaras. And so the entire diversity and the fellow feeling that South Asia has was a notion prior to 1947 and remains a notion beyond that, because I have seen a great degree of solidarities that have been that you can have with say students across South Asia who have felt the same. Youth organizations have certainly been playing a good amount of role in creating those solidarities and also highlighting these solidarities. And so civil society not only reach to the upper classes, but also beyond it. One of the places where South Asia is very different from, say, a Western country is its rural inhabitants. Much of South Asia is rural. Much of its inhabitants are rural, and these institutions, these legal institutions, these institutions have not been able to percolate democracy down to the grassroots. And that is one of the reasons where minorities have not been able to completely become their own choice makers, their own decision makers. And so decision making still remains very confined to very particular sections of society who can be counted as relatively privileged from those who do not have these access to power or education, in terms of knowledge, in terms of information, in terms of their ability to create opinion within the media, their ability to dissent. And so entire practical route to go about it is a great degree of work, both by civil society organizations, the state itself as well, where institutions can be brought to these smaller minorities, can be brought down to understanding how minorities within minorities also operate, how different sections of society with their individual identities have their own disadvantages from time to time. There is no one size fit all solution. These solutions have to be localized. These solutions have to be very, very personalized as well. And so public service delivery also needs to be personalized, where a good example would be how disabled people in South Asia have been quite absent from any conversation about minorities, while we see religion being a very important topic, caste, creed, ethnicity, language. These have been very interesting topics. We have never seen a mobilization of the of disabled or differently able people, and these communities which have largely been forgotten in public policy, as well as any form of grievance redressal mechanisms that South Asian countries have been through. And so while these are such small communities that in terms of electoral power, they do not matter at all. And in South Asia, we have a problem with electoral democracy being the final stage of democracy. Unfortunately, liberal democracy or constitutionalism to a great degree has had its own hindrances or has been diluted to a great degree in certain circumstances. And so these smaller communities are unable to able to compete with other groups in terms of resources that are allocated by society. And therefore, since they are not an electorate of great significance, they are unable to put across their own interests, across their own representation and their own identity. Neither are they able to build up to a stage where they themselves become a part of the national identity. And so be it transgenders, be it the queer populations, be it minorities like the differently able, these have been far more small pockets. And since they do not even concentrate around certain localities, it's not like you can for example, the Parsis you would mostly find in Mumbai, even though they're a very micro minority, these minorities are very well spread out. So they are unable to mobilize even as a constituency onto themselves. And so these minorities, micro minorities, and the different levels of minorities that South Asia see, they not only require institutional percolation down to the last person and democratic, democratic deepening, but also require access to different institutions of society and the polity to be able to voice themselves and to be able to represent their interests better and far louder. And there, I would say that there has been a great degree of progress that has happened, post the internet, post the 1991 liberalization of this entire subcontinent, and how relations between states have, despite their dry spells, have at least relatively become better, at least where violent clashes have been rarer between states in South Asia. So, and therefore you would see, policies like Look East in India, neighborhood first, different policies even by the Pakistani and say the Bhutanese government. These have been able to create a greater conscience amongst people about the neighborhood, about people who just across the border may share affiliations, may share the same kind of experiences, may share the same kind of grievances as well, with the state, with the society as well. And so that entire degree of solidarity that needs to be created, and the inclusive nature of nation building as well as community building that needs to be taken forward, has to be through institutions and through localized efforts, be it through toleration, be it through, if I give you very nuanced examples, one would be cultural exchanges between students. That has been stopped to a great degree between nations. There used to be certain programs, including my own school, but suddenly those got stopped, and that is the problem of irregularity that we see, where when you have friendly relations, these exchanges are booming. The moment you have a hostile exchange, these fellowships, these programs, these exchange, cultural exchange programs, they all get cancelled. And so there's a need for sustained policy making in South Asia. The entire problem with South Asia has been that one, the regional body that we have, SARC, has largely been defunct for a long time now. That has not been able to make a great degree of progress. And secondly, states in South Asia, because of their exclusivist natures and far more an inability to create a common regional agenda, they have not been able to go ahead and create a sustained policy of how to approach each other in the neighborhood, and that has created a great degree of problems of exclusion, a problem of their own alienation of minorities who have cross-border affiliations and affinities. And so it requires a great degree of localized efforts as well as institutional efforts from the civil society, as well as grassroots democracy making by the state, to create a consensus, to create a more communalized identity, to create a more tolerated society, a more tolerant society where affinities are respected, self-respect is maintained along with human dignity for each other.
Yeah, thank you so much, indeed. And you raised a couple of like valuable points. The misrepresentation of people with physical challenges is really alarming. We hardly even discuss
Hmm.
these community or these groups. I won't say group. I mean, they deserve a large degree of respect in terms of being recognized. I happen to know a couple of them. I will get a chance to get you introduced to some of them who are actively involved in raising the voices for their community, and they have achieved uh, like some great feats in their lives. And you've rightly said that institutionalism of on a ground level that needs to be catered as and then you also like talk about the defunctioning of SARC, which has been it is very alarming that needs to be looked around. So, Alan, thank you so much. We've almost finished this talk in a very in a timely manner. So, thank you so much for this much rich and deeply thoughtful conversation. You've helped us navigate the complex and the often contested terrain of identity and minority politics with both clarity and compassion. I wish you all the best for what you're doing, and it has been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's a delight. Thanks a lot for the invite, especially to Furqan sir. It was great that he called me up a few days back and gave me this opportunity. I'm glad that I could, share some of my experiences and some of my thoughts on the matter. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.